In 1978, Dynamo Dresden had just won their third consecutive championship and fifth of the decade. The dressing room was pure chaos. Drinks flowing, players celebrating like kings. Then the door opened. Erich Mielke walked in, head of the Stasi. Players froze mid-celebration. Mielke looked around the room and said, "Enjoy this one, because from now on, the championship belongs to Berlin." The players were stunned, and Mielke turned and left. The celebration was over, and so was Dresden's golden era. What happened next would become one of football's darkest conspiracies. 10 consecutive championships, rigged referees, stolen glory. This is the story of Dynamo Dresden, the club the Stasi tried to destroy. In East Germany, football wasn't just a sport, it was propaganda. After the Second World War, the communist government needed to prove their system was superior to the capitalist West. Sporting success became a weapon in the Cold War. Olympic medals, world records, football trophies. Each one was proof that communism worked. So the state created a system. Every major city got a flagship football club, each backed by a specific state entity. Leipzig had SC Lokomotive, the railway workers' club. SC Wismut was backed by the uranium mining industry. And in 1953, Dresden got Dynamo Dresden, backed by the German People's Police. The name Dynamo wasn't random. Across the Eastern Bloc, Dynamo clubs were always connected to security services, police, military. It was a badge of state power. Dresden's new club had resources and stability that others could only dream of. The club, then known as SG Dresden, won the East German Cup. They beat Wismut in the final, shocking the established powers of East German football. For Dresden, a city still rebuilding from the devastating Allied firebombings of '45, this was more than a trophy. It was proof that they could rise from the ashes. The cup sat in Dresden's cabinet. The players wore Dresden colours, and the success belonged to them. For now. Because one man was watching, and he wasn't happy. Erich Mielke was one of the most powerful and feared men in East Germany. As the head of the Stasi, the Ministry for State Security, he controlled a surveillance network of 90,000 officers and almost 200,000 informants. He had files on millions of citizens. He could destroy careers, break up families, and make people disappear. And he had a problem. There was no successful football team in East Berlin, the capital, the showcase of the communist state. Leipzig had their club. Dresden had just won the cup. But Berlin had nothing. Berlin was the centre of power. It was where foreign dignitaries visited. And it was where Mielke lived and worked. Berlin needed a champion. And he knew exactly where to find one. In 1954, Mielke made a decision that would haunt Dresden for decades. He didn't ask, he didn't negotiate. He simply took the entire club, the players, the structure, the success, and moved it 120 miles north to Berlin. Overnight, Dresden's cup-winning team had become BFC Dynamo, Mielke's personal pet project, and Dresden were left with nothing. Overnight, Dresden found themselves in the fourth tier of East Germany's league, a dizzying fall for a newly crowned cup winner. The club reformed as a shadow of itself, cobbled together from youth and reserve players deemed surplus to requirements in Berlin. But Dresden's size and sporting pedigree made this exile temporary. Within 5 years, they clawed back to the top tier. That betrayal and having their triumph ripped away forged something unbreakable, an iron resolve to earn respect on the pitch, not through backroom deals. It took time to rediscover their identity, but when they did, they were ruthless, uncompromising, a team that remembered what it felt like to have everything stolen. After clawing their way back from the fourth tier, Dresden spent the 1960s rebuilding. They developed youth players, found their identity, and by 1970 they were ready to prove something. Under manager Gerhard Prautzuch, Dresden assembled a team built on one principle: no one would ever take their success away again. They would earn it on the pitch, not through political favour. And earn it they did. Between 1971 and 78, Dresden won the championship 5 times, including a dominant 3 years in a row between 76 and 78. They also claimed 2 East German Cups. But domestic dominance wasn't enough. Dresden wanted to prove themselves on the European stage, a challenge that went far beyond football. For East German clubs, European competition meant navigating Cold War bureaucracy. Every away trip required state approval. Players needed special visas. The Stasi monitored every movement. Despite these obstacles, Dresden became a European force, led by Hans-Jürgen Krischer, who would finish his career as the club's all-time leading scorer with 131 goals, and goalkeeper Bert Jakubowski. Dresden reached the European Cup quarter-finals 4 times during the 1970s. They weren't the most technical team in Europe, but they were relentless, a reflection of the city that had survived firebombings and Soviet occupation. Opponents feared playing in Dresden, and their stadium became a fortress. Their European campaigns brought them face-to-face with the European elite. In 1973, they faced Bayern Munich in the quarter-finals of the European Cup. Bayern had Beckenbauer, Müller, Meyer. Dresden had Krischer and Belief. They lost 7-4 on aggregate, but they scored 4 goals against the best team in the world at the time. The message was clear. Dresden belonged. But their defining European rivalry was with Liverpool. In 1976, they lost 2-1 to the English side on aggregate in the quarter-finals of the European Cup. The second leg at Dresden Stadium was electric, pushing their team to within 1 goal of eliminating the eventual champions. They didn't win, but they proved something more important. East German football could stand toe-to-toe with the best. Dresden's golden era was built on a delicate bargain. Yes, they were state-affiliated, better facilities, first pick of young talent, all the advantages that came with the badge. But they kept the Stasi at arm's length when it mattered, on the pitch. Unlike their Berlin namesakes, Dresden won through talent, tactics, and a fan base that grew into something formidable. They were the people's champions, even if they wore the police's crest. That independence, though, was an illusion, and it was about to shatter. Erich Mielke, the man who'd gutted their first generation of players, wasn't finished with Dresden. The end of their golden age was sealed not on the pitch, but in the dressing room. In May 1978, Dresden had just won their 3rd consecutive title, their 5th championship of the decade. The dressing room was electric. Players sprayed champagne, music blared, and the celebrations were in full swing. Then the door opened. Erich Mielke entered the room, the head of the Stasi, one of the most powerful and feared men in East Germany. The music stopped, the laughter died. Players froze mid-celebration. Mielke looked around the room with cold contempt. Then he spoke. "Enjoy this one, because from now on, the championship belongs to Berlin. BFC Dynamo will be the champions." It wasn't a prediction, it was a command. Celebration was over, and so was Dresden's golden era. Mielke's prediction came true. The 1980s became a decade of systematic corruption in East German football. The most infamous example came in March '86. BFC Dynamo were playing Lokomotiv Leipzig in a crucial title race. Leipzig were leading 1-0 deep into stoppage time. The match appeared over. Then, in the 95th minute, referee Bernd Stumpf awarded BFC Dynamo a penalty. There was no foul, no contact, just a whistle, and Frank Pastor scored from the spot. The match ended 1-1. This penalty became known as the shame penalty of Leipzig. BFC Dynamo went on to win the title that season by just 2 points. Without that penalty, Leipzig would have been champions. This wasn't an isolated incident. Opposition fans would leave matches early to avoid watching the inevitable last-minute penalties or decisions that would hand BFC Dynamo the points. Referees were on the Stasi payroll. Players were bribed or intimidated. The corruption was so blatant that it became an open joke, except that no one was laughing. BFC Dynamo won the league an astonishing 10 successive times between 79 and 88. Despite the corruption, Dresden remained a force. They finished as league runners-up 5 times during the 80s, always second to BFC Dynamo. They also won the East German Cup 3 times, proving their quality in knockout competitions where single-match corruption was harder to orchestrate. But they channeled their frustration into European competition, where Mielke's influence couldn't reach. In '89, they embarked on a stunning UEFA Cup run that captured the imagination of East German football fans, who were sick of BFC's manufactured dominance. They knocked out Italian side AS Roma and then faced Stuttgart in the semi-finals, a chance to reach a European final and prove that Dresden, not Berlin, were East Germany's true champions. They lost 2-1 on aggregate, but the run proved something crucial. When the playing field was level, when referees weren't on the Stasi payroll, Dresden could compete with anyone. Dresden fans who'd watched their team robbed year after year developed a fierce rivalry with BFC Dynamo that went far beyond football. Supporting Dresden became an act of resistance. Every match against Berlin was a referendum on the Stasi's control. Every goal against them was a small victory against the system itself. By 1988, the East German state was collapsing. The economy was in freefall. Citizens were fleeing to the west through Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Mass protests were erupting in Leipzig and Dresden. The Soviet Union under Gorbachev was no longer willing to prop up failing regimes. And Erich Mielke, the man who'd controlled East German football for 3 decades, was now fighting for his political survival. The Stasi was facing unprecedented dissent. Files were being burned, informants were being exposed. Mielke had bigger problems than ensuring BFC Dynamo won football matches. His grip was loosening. For the first time since 1979, Dresden had a chance, and they seized their moment. In 1989, they won the title again, their first championship in 11 years. Dresden were finally champions again. The scenes in Dresden were euphoric. This wasn't just a football title, it was a vindication. It was justice. It was proof that when the playing field was level, Dresden were the best team in East Germany. Then they did it again. In 1990, Dresden won their second consecutive title, and it was the last one in their history. The league that had existed since 1949 that Mielke had corrupted, the league that had defined East German football for 40 years, ended with Dresden as champions. It was poetic. The club that had been betrayed in 1954, robbed throughout the 80s, and refused to bend, won the last 2 titles before the entire system collapsed. Dresden had outlasted Mielke. They'd outlasted the Stasi, and they'd outlasted East Germany itself. But Dresden's triumph was about to turn to tragedy. Their 1990 title qualified them for the European Cup the following year. In the first round, they drew Red Star Belgrade, the reigning Yugoslav champions. The first leg in Belgrade in September ended 3-0 to Red Star. Dresden were outplayed, but the tie wasn't over. The second leg in Dresden would decide everything. However, violence from a section of Dresden fans brought UEFA's hammer down. They were banned from European competition for the following season, and they'd never get another chance. Dynamo Dresden, a club forged in European competition, was locked out. In November '89, the Berlin Wall fell. Within months, the Oberliga folded. The Dynamo system, the state-backed machine that had defined East German football, ceased to exist. Dresden and their eastern rivals now faced the Bundesliga. Richer, faster, more ruthless. The final Oberliga season became a desperate scramble for survival. Dresden finished runners-up, earning their Bundesliga place. They'd no idea what reunification would actually cost them. As Germany began the process of reunification, the Treuhand, the government agency tasked with privatising East German industry, sold off factories for a fraction of their value. The Robotron computer plant in Dresden, which once employed nearly 70,000 people, was dismantled and sold in pieces. Unemployment in the East hit 20%. Entire communities collapsed overnight. Football clubs were no exception. East German teams that had operated under state funding for 40 years now found that funding had vanished. Overnight, clubs like Dresden had to compete in a capitalist system with budgets they couldn't sustain. The Bundesliga set the terms. East German clubs could join, but only if they met Western financial standards. For Dresden, it was an almost impossible task. They were entering one of the richest leagues in Europe, with an East German budget and no safety net. What followed was an exodus. For 40 years, East German players had been locked behind the Iron Curtain. Now the border was open and Western clubs came shopping. The wage gap was staggering. Bundesliga clubs were offering salaries 10 and 20 times higher than what Dresden could pay. And their stars faced a choice: loyalty or survival. And most chose survival. Ulf Kirsten, the club's talisman and top scorer, signed with Bayer Leverkusen in 1990. He'd go on to become one of the Bundesliga's most prolific strikers, scoring 182 goals in a 15-year spell. Uwe Rosler stayed longer, but even he couldn't resist forever. By 92 he was gone, first to Nuremberg and then Manchester City, where he became a cult hero. Dresden fans watched their players succeed elsewhere while their own club crumbled. It wasn't just about losing players, it was about losing identity. The team that had won back-to-back titles in 89 and 90 was being dismantled, and there was nothing Dresden could do to stop it. With their best players leaving, Dresden entered the 91-92 Bundesliga season as lambs to the slaughter. They were competing against clubs with corporate sponsors, modern stadiums, and transfer budgets that dwarfed Dresden's entire annual revenues. Bayern Munich spent more on a single player than Dresden's entire squad was worth. The first 2 seasons were pure survival mode. They finished 15th and 14th, just above the relegation zone. Every match was a battle, every point was earned through desperation and willpower. 93-94 offered a false hope. Dresden clawed to 13th place on the backs of Rosler and Poland's Piotr Nowak, but that progress soon became a mirage. In 94-95, the cracks became chasms. They were dead last, 9 points from safety, and relegated for the Bundesliga. To this day, they've never been back. Relegation was just the beginning. Dresden had been hemorrhaging money trying to keep pace. They were 10 million Reichsmarks in debt, a fortune in East German currency, but now worthless in the new economy. Timing couldn't have been crueler. The Premier League's TV billions were reshaping football into a global business, and Dresden was playing by rules that no longer existed. The German football authorities reviewed Dresden's finances and revoked their second division license. Forced into the third tier of regional football, a club that had reached a European semi-final, that had dominated an entire nation's football, were reduced to a ghost, haunting the lower leagues. Over the next 9 years, Dresden cycled through 14 different managers. The club declared bankruptcy twice. Wages went unpaid for months. Players abandoned ship mid-season. The stadium, which was once packed with thousands of screaming fans, was now full of empty seats and broken dreams. By 98, the club owed creditors over €8 million, but the lowest point came in 2000. The German football authorities restructured the third tier, consolidating 4 regional leagues into 2. Only the top teams would stay in the higher tier. Dresden needed a top 4 finish, but they could only manage 8th. The club that had won the 89 and 90 titles just 10 years before was now heading into the same league as amateur clubs and reserve teams. For fans who'd watched Dresden play in Europe, it was incomprehensible. The club was at rock bottom. For the first time in their history, Dresden were asking, will this club exist in 5 years? But the fan base was not merely supportive, they were club saviours. In one of the most remarkable acts of fan loyalty in modern football, Dresden supporters helped the club pay off its massive debts. Instead of conventional fundraising, they voluntarily paid double the amount for their season tickets, a collective sacrifice that raised more than €2.5 million. It was a testament to the fact that while the state may have founded the club, the fans owned its soul. The rescue mission worked, and their motto, "We're coming back," looked real for a while. 2 promotions in 3 years. By 2004, Dresden had clawed back to the second tier, but then the cycle began. Relegated in 2006, 5 years in the third tier, promoted again in 2011. And since 2004, Dresden has been promoted 4 times and relegated 4 times. The Bundesliga 2 is too fast, too rich, too relentless for a club still struggling with the financial issues of the past. In 2016-17, they came the closest of all, a 5th place finish, but still 16 points from promotion. The next season, they barely survived the drop. And the Bundesliga 2 has become one of the world's most competitive second divisions, filled with former giants. And Dresden is still there, still fighting, still trapped. Today, their stadium is still packed with 30,000 fans every home game. They still sing, they still believe, and the banner still hangs in the K-Block, the club with the best fans. But belief alone can't overcome economics. Dresden's annual budget is 12 million euros, a figure which Bundesliga clubs are spending on single players. The gap that opened in 1990 has never really closed. This is the reality of East German football. BFC Dynamo, the Stasi club that stole Dresden's titles, in the 5th tier. Dresden is the survivor, but survival isn't the success that they crave. The tragedy of Dynamo Dresden is not that they fell, it's that they were never allowed to compete on equal terms. The Stasi stole their 1980s. The club that competed in Europe, that filled stadiums across the Eastern Bloc, is now fighting for promotion from the 2nd tier. Will Dresden ever return to the Bundesliga? The honest answer is probably not. The financial gap is just too wide and the cycle is too relentless. But the fans will keep coming. The songs will keep echoing. The yellow and black will keep flying. Because for the people of Dresden, this club is not just about football. It's about identity. It's about survival and refusing to disappear. Dynamo Dresden were known as the Beast from the East. And even in the 3rd tier, even after decades of chaos, even with an uncertain future, the Beast is still waiting, ready to wake from its slumber. If you like underdog stories and football with a soul, hit like and subscribe. What are your memories of this Dresden side? Let us know in the comments below. And in the meantime, stay tuned for more football history. One incredible story